I'd love to learn a bit more about your background or how you got started in the industry. So what was a moment that inspired you to become a film editor? How did that work out? Did you always have that dream, or did that just happen?
Well, yes and no. I grew up in a film editing family. In fact, my grandfather was a projectionist in the Nickelodeon days in Times Square. We're all from New York, and my dad ran one of the first commercial post-production companies in Manhattan, starting in the 60s and the 70s. And a lot of people were coming out of college, sort of young, idealistic, artistically inclined people, a lot of English lit majors, and they kind of didn't know what they'd do. They were kind of like, turbulent times, and they got into this shop my dad ran, but what they realized was they didn't want to necessarily make TV commercials. They wanted to make feature films. So a lot of those people became film editors, and some of them actually became my mentors. So I was lucky in that respect that I had a foot in the door, but I didn't always want to be a feature film editor. I kind of wanted to be a cinematographer. I really loved photography, and I did a lot of that even as a young kid. But that was a very tough nut to crack. Once we moved out to California, I kind of started to realize how closed the guilds were and how difficult it was to get into, for example, the cinematography guild if you didn't know anyone. So I was kind of, I was working at a camera rental house as a driver and, sweeping out the offices. And I was about, 18 or 19 years old, and I went and saw the movie Apocalypse Now at the Cinerama Dome in 235, anamorphic aspect ratio, and it was just huge. It was a giant theater, and it was full. It was a midnight show. That movie was, so powerful, and the editing was so, moving and artistic that I came out of that movie and I said, editing seems like a pretty good, opportunity also, and I have a foot in the door there. So that was kind of the moment I said, yeah, I'm going to go for that.
Did you have to do certain traditional training, like go to film school, or did you just learn by doing?
I didn't go to film school. I did a couple of years at community college out here. And again, I studied things like art history and psychology, and English lit. And, I kind of had ants in my pants, my mother used to say. I really just wanted to start working. I was very excited about movies. I loved movies and even TV growing up because my dad kind of was involved in it, and I always saw the film and things like that. So, look, a film education is a tremendous, resource. But you don't necessarily need to do it. You can really, you can just sort of just go work. And sometimes, that's helpful, and other times it's a hindrance. So it just depends on the person, I think.
And what was the first project you worked on, and what do you remember from that experience? Was it daunting, exciting?
Yeah, so, like I said, I got a job working for a woman. Actually, she's a pretty well-known, in fact, she's one of the most well-known feature film editors of all time. Her name was Dee Allen, and she was from New York and had her, most of her career out there early on. And I had an opportunity to work not directly for her, but for the sound crew that she was working with on a picture called Mike's Murder. And I literally, you literally started at the bottom. I was, kind of like running and picking things up. But I was working for this amazing woman who, was so talented and had such a passion and love for movies, and was just so exciting to be around. So, even though I was doing kind of menial chores, relatively speaking, I mean, I was still learning things about the technical aspects of film and sound editing. You pick things up by osmosis, and you watch the cut evolve and things like that. And that was that was really, I knew I was like in the right place at that point, and I was just okay. Well, this is good.
That's really exciting. Yeah. And in terms of the learning process, you said kind of picking up learning from other people, but did you have to also separately hone your skills in a way, or is that just by being in that environment that one picks up those skills? How does that work?
Yeah, well, again, I was lucky because even before I started my feature film and television editing career and assisting, which before that, I kind of came up in my dad's shop, and even as a child, I mean, there were these things called these film trim bins where they used to hang the film. You've probably seen pictures and stuff, and
yeah.
they used to put me in there when I was like a toddler to kind of keep me out of trouble. It was kind of like my playpen. So I grew up in this environment, and I used to play with the film and splice it and things like that with the tape. And, my dad was a real mentor also early on because I worked in his, when we came out to California, he kind of got into the trailer business and film marketing. And, he told me something that has stuck with me to this day, which is, if you make a splice in the film, it's only splicing tape. You can always tape it back together and change your mind. And, I think that was a real critical lesson that, editing is re-editing, and it's like writing is rewriting, and you look at the famous paintings of Picasso and things like that, and you study that, and you realize that they used to paint over the canvases repeatedly. They would make changes. And not being afraid to make changes to the work was a real kind of like critical lesson that I learned early on. So it gave me a lot of confidence realizing that, you can't really make a mistake. I mean, you can, sure, but, you can rework them. And then when you're working with the director and a team, you get feedback and their input and stuff. So don't be afraid to try to be, creative was sort of like the lesson that was really, really important.
And in terms of you working on projects, so you've worked on so many amazing films, including Fallen, Assassins, also shows. How does that work? Does someone call you up and say, hey, do you have time? And then how long do you work on a film? I guess it depends, but maybe we can pick an example and you can walk us through that.
Yeah, well, the film that I just finished for Netflix, which is called Sextuplets, and it's a comedy starring Marlon Wayans, who comes from the Wayans brothers clan, but this is Marlon only. I was on this for 10 and a half months.
Oh, wow.
So, so like the director, Mike Titus, like he was my one client this year. So what happens is you develop these relationships with the people that you work for, and they're kind of like, who you go back to or who come back to you for future projects. So, early on, there was a lot of, sort of knocking on doors and cold calling and sort of sending out my resume. And there was no, social media there or internet or email back then. So, it was a little bit more difficult in that respect. But you start to build your network. You build your network of relationships. And, quite often those are the people who like end up calling you back and asking you to work on future projects. And, you've really kind of got to nurture that network, carefully. And, when I became an editor, I did get an agent. There are agents for, quote unquote, below the line, craftspeople, cinematographers, production designers, etc. And, agents, they can help out to a certain extent, but really it's about your relationships. And you always have to keep that in mind.
And do the directors say, I have a vision of how this could be edited, or do you get that freedom to be like, I want to do it like this? How does that work in terms of artistic liberty?
Well, when you come onto a film and you meet with the director, if you haven't worked with them before, you'll usually sit down and maybe have lunch or talk or have a meeting, and you'll talk about the script, and they'll give you an idea what they're thinking about and maybe some of the films that have influenced them and, so on and so forth. No one's really kind of like, been as, specific about that kind of thing. And the directors I've worked for, some of them, they all try to give you, pointers and notes about how they want the film, put together. But what happens is when they're shooting, you start cutting, the day they start shooting. You get the film from the day before, and, you get into it. And what happens is they get really busy, and they're overwhelmed with, all of the complexities and problem solving that they have to do in production. So quite often, you're left alone for the entire production shoot, and that's called the editor's cut. And, to me, that's a really great period of time where I can kind of like take the film and it speaks to you because the actors contribute something different and all the different crafts people contribute something different. And, it sort of becomes this amalgam. It's a collaborative process. And so what you do as the editor is you kind of like look at it and you say, oh, well, that was the best. And, you put together your own sort of take on the project. Now, of course, sometimes they'll be very specific and they'll say, I love this take and I really want that. And, you might think, well, that was pretty good, but there's parts of these other takes that are better. And so what you'll do is you'll end up cutting different versions, alternate versions. And, and then you'll give the director, different options and really different ideas and ways to look at the movie and the project. And, hopefully they'll like them. And if they don't, you'll change it and, you'll move on. And that's how a film is made. It's really sort of like this collaboration of ideas. And some directors are very, I don't know, you could say a micromanager, and it's this way. And, sometimes the editor feels like he's just or she's just being treated like a pair of hands and operating a computer. But, I haven't really, I've been lucky. I've had very few of those experiences. I've really, I've been, the majority of my experiences have been where the director appreciates what I can bring to the project as a creative person, and those are certainly the most rewarding.
Have you had a favorite project, or was there one experience that was really memorable that stood out to you?
Gosh, I get asked this question, and I've done almost 50 films and television shows in my career, so it's hard to pick one. I mean, there are so many great experiences from being an assistant and even an apprentice editor on films like Terms of Endearment, just like, the energy that was going on there with that film. And then when it came out, it was so successful. So, I mean, and then Back to the Future as an assistant sound editor. I mean, boy, what a heady experience that was. And then, of course, when I started editing, I mean, I edited some small films. I edited this little action movie called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, for Kiefer Sutherland. And we worked in Park City, Utah, and it was wintertime, and, just the experiences there. And then, of course, doing the pilot for NYPD Blue and getting nominated for, an Emmy Award and an Eddie Award. So there have been, so many great experiences. I got to tell you, the last 3 films that I've done with Marlon and Mike Titus have been fantastic because what happens when you get hired a second and a third time for the same director is, you're obviously very confident that they really love your work, and you also develop like a shorthand with them. So you kind of like, what they want, and you see the film and you kind of know what they're going for. And, it just makes the creative process kind of like, almost like we're reading each other's minds in a way. He'll give me a note and I'll be doing the note as he's kind of telling me. So that's also a really fun, time and, really rewarding.
Was there a project that was really technically difficult, or you remember that it was a real challenge, or is every film you go into a new challenge?
Yeah, I mean, they really are. They're like, they're like your children. They are all different. And some are more challenging than others. And, while I won't name names, there have been projects where, and thankfully, like I said, there's only been a few of them, but, the film just doesn't look great and the performances are not great and they've kind of like completely taken a different direction than what you had imagined was in, and what was in the script. Sometimes an actor, sort of is a powerful actor and has a lot of power and kind of, can kind of like change the whole tone and color of what you thought the project was. And then, there's things like that. And, there's projects where just technically they, try to accomplish something that they couldn't really accomplish practically or whatever. And editing is a career of problem solving. So you're always doing these kinds of things. But, sometimes the problem solving becomes, really, really like, pushing a boulder up a hill. So it's those, and you don't get those satisfaction moments where you've solved this problem and it looks great. It's like you've solved this problem and it's okay. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, those are the kinds of things that are always, that are always sort of frustrating and keep you up at night.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the job is a job of coming up with solutions to take. For example, on the film that I'm doing, we had almost 200 hours of original material. Take 200 hours and boil it down to 90 minutes. So
wow.
That's a big hurdle to begin with, right?
Yeah, fathom that. I guess if someone doesn't really know much about editing like me, and I go and watch a movie, what do you consider? Is there such a thing as bad editing, or something where you see and you're like, oh, that was bad? And how can one recognize that, or is that just not the case when you see a good movie in the cinema?
Well, I think again, there's so many elements that go into why an editor has made an edit, per se. It could have been the footage. It could have been a performance problem. It could have been a technical issue. It could have been just something that director wanted, or not even the director, maybe the studio or the star wanted. So I withhold judgment on, individual edits per se. It's really more about whether I just enjoyed the movie or not, whether it flowed for me, whether I was, taken out of it. That's an expression you use. Was I taken out of the movie for some reason? Did it break the thread? So really that's kind of like the way I judge it. When I look at a movie, because I've been doing it for so long, I know so many of the variables that are involved that I sort of have a lot of empathy for the filmmakers and, try to give them the benefit of the doubt because, I know how hard it is to make a film, whether it's a small independent or a huge, budget studio film. It's a really, it's a hard artistic endeavor.
In terms of if there is a young filmmaker who really wants to get into the business and say doesn't really know anyone or doesn't have any connections, how would you advise maybe someone who's even listening now to go about that? Well,
I think that it's an awesome time to come into the business with the streaming networks and social media and places like YouTube and Vimeo and what have you. There's a lot of opportunities. Amazon, Prime, and Netflix and Hulu and all of these new avenues of distribution are creating a tremendous production boom out here. And plus the economy is pretty good right now. So there's a lot of film work. And, the advantage you have these days is that you really don't need to know. You don't have to have like a father or an uncle in the business like I did. It doesn't hurt, but it might not necessarily even help because you have all of these social networks. And again, like I said before, it's really about the network that you cultivate and develop. So, there's dozens of groups on Facebook that you can start, you can join and sort of, enter the conversation about like, where do I get my foot in the door? Who might be looking for someone even as a, entry level position. And they post, people post jobs. This person's looking for this person. And so you have an opportunity to really kind of like participate in that way. And also there's all kinds of events. There's so many more film events and festivals where you can go and meet people, meet directors and producers, and kind of like get yourself out there if you've already got a reel. So it's a really good time in that respect. But I think that you have to really, like anything in life, you have to be focused. And you have to be committed, and you have to, have a little bit of passion, a little bit of talent, and a lot of passion about it. You know what I mean? And not get too discouraged, because, nothing in this life is easy, and sometimes it takes some time to develop that network of relationships that you're going to work with, possibly over your entire career. But give it time. Don't get down. Maybe, figure out a side gig when you're really first starting out, so you don't starve, and keep going, keep plugging away, because, making movies is a pretty, at the end of the day, it's as hard as it is, it's a pretty rewarding and satisfying way to make a living.
Yeah, and you were talking before about, that you need to be focused and have that passion. And I'm curious about, talent and then also skill level. Do you think that certain editors just have that certain something that can be taught, or is someone who's super passionate about it but maybe doesn't have that talent, do you think they can make it?
Yeah, well, I think, again, like anything else, there, certain things, just click with people, and they get it, and they, I don't know whether it's because they love it so much that they kind of develop this inner confidence, and they just kind of keep going, and they kind of like know they're going to do it. And then there are other people who maybe, are always, sort of self-critical and kind of like, hinder themselves for that reason. And I think it's just, I do think that you can become a better editor as time goes on. I think it's a skill that can be honed and improved with time, and all the different kinds of things you can learn about, what visual effects or sound or, the process, the workflow. But, I think that, I think like anything, some people are just sort of naturally better at it than others. Like, I love art, and I'm very, I consider myself, a craftsman and creative, but like I can't paint. I can't really, I can't do that. So, you got to kind of, just sort of have confidence in yourself and see how you do, and stick with it for a while. Because the one thing I've learned about like Hollywood, for example, and the film business is, the people that succeed are the people that stick with it, the ones that are persistent over years and years and years. And I've seen it with actors and writers and editors, and it's the ones that don't quit that eventually end up making it,
That's encouraging to hear too, that as long as you have a passion and you even stick to it, that it can work out.
Yeah.
When someone hears about like an editor, what do you think are the most important skills that they should possess, or maybe something that's not as obvious as just knowing the technical tools? Is there something else I think is really important that people may underestimate that goes into editing, a certain skill? Or... Yes. Well, actually, I think the technical aspect is probably one of the most well-known aspects. I use this the metaphor of like a triangle. I think it's a three-sided sort of skill set. I think to become a really good editor, I think there's sort of like this technical side, and then there's obviously the creative side, and then there's sort of like the least known side, which is sort of like the diplomatic side, or the interpersonal relationship side. I think that's like almost the base of the triangle, and almost one of the most critical elements, which is you're dealing with a lot of really creative people, and sometimes, creative people have, sensitive personalities or delicate egos or things like that. And, as an editor, you're not only technical and creative, but you're also, you can also be sometimes an armchair psychologist at times, or a psychiatrist. You're sort of helping people work through their issues to bring their vision to the screen.
So you've really kind of got to work on that diplomacy and that sort of interpersonal relationship side, because you got to know when you know if you're in a room with creative people and producers and studio executives and directors, you've got to know maybe when to like give your feedback and not give your feedback, because sometimes, they don't necessarily want to hear from you, and that's okay, and you got to put your ego aside and say, it's their movie, and, just shut up. So
it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, because we all are, we all have our creative, instincts, and so it's sort of learning to navigate that part of the equation, which I think is really important, and sometimes, people don't have a clue about.
And was there something that surprised you, the third part of the triangle, the whole being diplomatic? Was that something that you just learned, or was it like, whoa, that's not something I expected with this job?
That's something that took me the longest time to learn.
Okay.
And because, when you're young and you're full of energy and passion, it's all about like my opinion and what I think about this, and, how could they change my cut because it was so perfect to begin with, and things like that. But, as time goes on, you realize, that that's not the way the game is played. So, unfortunately, it took me a while to learn that. Thank goodness I have learned it, because, I don't think that, you can survive in the business without learning that lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I didn't expect, but definitely really important to know. And you obviously also teach a lot. You have an online film editing course called Master the Workflow. And also, now with online courses becoming very popular, accessible. So tell us more about that program, what you teach there, and how important online film courses are becoming now.
Well, yes, it's really important. Like when I first started in the business, I took a class at UCLA Extension. It was called Editing for the Apprentice and the Assistant Editor. And it was out here in Los Angeles, obviously, and it wasn't offered anywhere else. And it was taught by a couple of veteran editors, and it really gave you an inside look at how the film editing room workflow, was. And, I took that and it was real helpful, and, and then, I went into the business and I worked in film for 10 years, and then was one of the first guys to do digital, and sort of did that for, I've done that for many years. And a couple of years ago, I was working with my assistant, and he was Richard Sanchez, and he was just such a top-notch guy, and I he kind of reminded me of myself, and, energetic and passionate. And, he had created this FileMaker database that tracked all of the metadata that you track in filmmaking, post-production. And I thought it was a really cool thing, and we started talking, and I came back to him a couple of weeks later, and I said, why don't we create this course? Because there's really, or what do you think about this idea about creating a course? Because, these are the kinds of skills that you don't learn in film school, the nuts and bolts, day-to-day process of becoming an assistant editor from start to finish. And not only the technical and the creative, but the diplomatic and interpersonal side of it also. And he loved the idea. And, it was kind of like this, I envisioned it as this online version of what I had taken many years ago. Because again, like I said, there's nothing else that teaches you the skills, and sort of like the landmines to avoid. So we kind of like put up a weather balloon and on a Facebook group with assistant editors, and we got 300 responses in the first 48 hours of people who were really interested. So we thought, we'll do this. And the other thing about the reason we created a course for assistant editors is because, up until this point in the industry, and, obviously it'll probably change a little bit, and there are exceptions, but the way to become a professional film editor is to become an assistant film editor first. I mean, that's how you move up the ranks. And, some people who are not familiar with the business or don't don't have any, sort of understanding of the guild system and things like that, sort of think, oh, well, I'll just become an editor. I'll start working in Adobe Premiere. And yeah, I mean, maybe, but your odds of getting a job, on a professional long form scripted project are going to be, are going to be more difficult. So we wanted to train assistants, which again, is sort of like the grooming to become full editors, and that's how you sort of get the bump up. And it's been great. We've had over 400 people go through the course, almost 40 countries around the world, sort of like the far reaches of, places that we didn't even think would have people interested in film editing and assistant film editing. And it's been a real, it's been a real thrill. And now we have this community of about 3,000 people, and that they participate, and it's a lot of fun.
And in terms of the structure of the course, what can someone expect as they take that? Is it a step by step? Is there like an introduction, or how is the course set up?
Yeah, great question. We set it up like a film project, exactly like the workflow of an actual job. So we start off with, your first meeting with the editor, and then we talk about what happens, before the shoot, in the pre-production and the post-production pipeline meetings, where you'll powwow with all of the people on the project, from the cameraman to the digital imaging tech to the post-production supervisor and the laboratory, and what goes on in that kind of meeting. And then, of course, production, what the assistant editor's skills and tasks are in production. Then, of course, during the editor's cut and the director's cut, and all the kinds of different things that might happen during that period. Then, of course, finishing and final delivery to the studio, and the requirements in that portion of the project. And then, of course, we have this specific lesson dedicated to editing room diplomacy, and what are the things that you really, really need to look out for. So it's 6 modules, and we keep adding stuff. We actually, I think we're up to like 7. We have 6 or 7 modules. It's 32 lessons. It's 14 plus hours of instruction, and we also offer people a private students-only Facebook group where they can, sort of network and get questions answered. We provide the digital code book, which is the FileMaker database that Richard has developed over the years, and it's a database on steroids, which helps you track all of the material. Because, like I said, we had 200 hours of film, not to mention almost 1,000 visual effects on the movie that I just finished. You've got to keep track of every frame, and you've really got to keep track of all the elements that make up every frame. So it's quite involved, and if you can master this, you can really have a good handle. Like when the director says, "Hey, I remember he said this line here and there, and where's that take?" And boom, you reference it in the database, and you're a rock star in the cutting room.
Yeah, that's like a very thorough course. Awesome. And you also recently announced, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're awarding a scholarship to 10 people who are selected, right?
Yes, we actually awarded 10 scholarships to people who went through the ACE internship program. ACE is the American Cinema Editors Professional Organization. Worldwide, and these people applied and were taken into the ACE internship program, and several of their fellowship programs, and we gave those folks the course and admission to the course for free, and they became part of our community. And we try to do that, sort of as much as we can. We try to provide the course to a certain amount of people who, have traditionally not had the resources or have been underrepresented in the film community. Because, as a personal mission, I've always really thought that it's what really kind of gets me going is and really, gives me a lot of satisfaction is to see people develop their own creative skills and give them the ability to have their voice heard, whether it be as, an editor or as a director or a cinematographer. If I can facilitate that in any way, I think I've done a good job. And, I just know there's a lot of people out there that love movies as much as I do. And, but it's been tough because of whatever reason, women have been underrepresented, people of color have been underrepresented. So we're trying to reach out and see, if we can help a few people every year, get the training that they might want to become professional filmmakers.
Now, also just in terms of for you looking forward, maybe like 2-3 years or 10 years, whatever you want. Do you have? You've done probably every type of movie, but is there a certain goal or dream you have to work on something in particular?
Yeah, that's another great question. I still have movies that I'd love to be a part of. I started out on kind of big studio films, and then I kind of like the movie industry changed, and it's become a little more corporate at the higher end, and then I kind of segued into action and police dramas, and then somehow I got I don't want to say pigeonholed, but kind of got sent in the direction of comedy, and I've done a lot of comedies lately. But I got into the movie business, because of films like I said, Apocalypse Now and Godfather, and movies like Dog Day Afternoon and Bonnie and Clyde. These were the films my mentors made, and really like fundamental human dramas and things like that. So I'm looking I'd love to do more kind of like indie things, unique voices of new directors and writers and producers, and I'd really love to find some of those, and it seems like there's a lot of opportunities for those kinds of things now with, again, streaming. And so they don't have to be big studio films, they just have to, I'd love films with a great script and great actors. I think that's what every editor sort of hopes for at heart. But so we'll see if one of those comes along, and again, we're going to continue to develop the courses. We've got a couple of on the development in the development stages, and we think we've got a couple of exciting things that people are really going to respond to and have sort of indicated they want. So we'll see how massive the workflow goes also.
Awesome. Yeah, we look forward to a new project from you for sure. And, to wrap up the interview, I always give my guests the opportunity to announce any upcoming projects or events. So you said you worked on a movie for Netflix. Is that coming out soon? And also maybe the website of your course as well.
Sure. Well, the movie is actually coming out today, the day we're recording this. So it'll probably be a few days before you actually broadcast it. But it's being released on Friday, August 16th, in 190 countries. It's a comedy starring Marlon Wayans, and it's a really interesting project that I'm super proud of. Marlon plays 7 different characters, so there was a tremendous amount of visual effects. It's kind of like it's not like Nutty Professor or Multiplicity or one of those movies, because the technology has sort of advanced a lot since those days. And, we use these motion control cameras and dollies and things. And, the director obviously did, and we composited all that stuff. So it's kind of like a big visual effects movie, but it's not a superhero movie. So, yeah, and Marlon's really funny in it, and it's a lot of fun. And he really kind of does amazing performances with 7 different characters, and I hope that he gets sort of like some credit because as an actor and a performer, because he's really been noticed by people like Darren Aronofsky, and he's going to be in the upcoming Sofia Coppola film. So but obviously he's known mostly as a comedian, but he's a terrific actor. So yeah, it's a really cool project. Comes out on Netflix today, and if people would like to check out the course, please check us out at mastertheworkflow.com. You can also email us if you have any question at info@mastertheworkflow.com, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to help you out if we can.
Cool. Well, yeah, I know what I'm watching tonight.
Oh, cool.
Well, thank you
That's great.
so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, well, so nice talking with you.